just throw the big ones last minute at us. Okay, all right. So thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about, as Michael mentioned, entity identity is kind of where my mind's been at, and Stefan here and Tim are really working on me to adopt organizational identity. So I'm going to try to adopt it. You have here's evidence right here. And I believe in it. It is the way to go. It absolutely is. So organizational identity, how does it apply to telecom? That's what I'm going to dive just a little bit deeper into. We're going to actually have some diagrams of what does this look like with Stir Shaken. But as I was listening to the panelists prior, and Eric, great job, and all those who attended here, there's a theme that popped in my head. And I was like, do I say this or don't I? And I think I have to. You know, we talked about bad actors. Bad actors are really good with identity. Good actors are really bad with identity. There's a problem. But you know what's interesting? On both sides, they're both trying to get money off of identity. That is what we're doing here. Just one's a little bit more nefarious. The spoof I spoof, whatever that was recently. And kudos to the United Kingdom for actually doing enforcement and actually putting someone somewhere and stopping the bad traffic and not just slapping a little hand like we do in the United States. It's unfortunate, but it is what we do. So what we're focused on here, and what I want to talk about, is communicating trusted organizational identity. Now we keep using those words, identity, verifiable, verified, trust. It's not trust, it's a person, it's not a person, it's a business. I know it can be a little confusing. And one thing that I think is really important here is that it is a human at the end of all of this. That's what has been so enlightening about Glyph and what I've discovered in digging a little bit deeper down into it, is we really do have to get to the human. It's humans that are doing business. That's who got put in jail with regards to committing fraud on communications. It wasn't a business that went to jail. It wasn't a business that got fined and gets the bad reputation holistically. It's that individual. In fact, in the United States, if there is an individual who's committed crime or fraud with a call center, it's that business owner's name that goes on a list. They are no longer allowed to run a call center. So it's really getting down to the human level when it comes to that. This is the world right now in the United States for legal businesses, organizations that have an identity. Their calls, as we kind of mentioned earlier, are getting labeled scam and fraud. Who here would think that's a good use of identity? Are we getting it right? If we call your hospital fraud, if we call the school that's trying to call you about your child fraud or a scam, we've gotten it all wrong, like horrifically all wrong. It's so wrong that I have a really good business to fix this. That's exactly how I started Numerical, was because I actually, unfortunately, was a little bit a part of creating this reality for businesses. The FCC established a robocall working group to basically say, hey, we're the FCC, we're going to mandate the carriers, that's AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, either stop all this fraud that's coming across the voice channel, or we will mandate you to. So in the United States, we like to put on shows, businesses do, and they go, oh no, we're going to solve the problem. Look at us all coming together. We're going to publish a report. I was a part of writing this report, and I kept raising my hand because we were talking about, oh, we're going to identify a call and present it as fraud to the consumer. And my clients at the time were banks, hospitals, schools, like I mentioned. And I went, how in the world are you going to know who's behind that call if I haven't told you any kind of identification information? And oh, by the way, there's no way within the infrastructure for me to deliver the identity. Oh, Rebekah, be quiet. We have a report. So I was quiet for a little bit. If you get to know me, I'm not quiet. I speak up a lot. So literally took 1 quarter after that report was published, and one of those carriers calls me and goes, ooh, okay, so we've been talking. Your name keeps coming up. We've decided we're going to take your stance. What do we do? The what do we do was, well, first of all, it's kind of scary to get a call like that, because then it means, like, if you complain about something, be prepared to back it up and actually solve it. So I thought, all right, here we go. What we do, we get identity. We have to verify the identity of the bank, the hospital. In exchange, if I'm able to give that to the carrier, would you not label a call fraud? They go, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. If they're spammy, which that's another word, we talked about that gray area that was on the panel, they're not, illegal because they're not a fraudulent actor, but maybe they're a business that's like, okay, you keep calling me like 10 times a day. I do not want to finish checking out online with that pair of shorts and those sandals that I have in my cart, right? Like, I really just don't want to continue this. So in exchange for being labeled spammy, we came up with this kind of remediation process. Guess what is involved in the remediation process? Identity. It keeps coming back to identity. And this concept that's emerged out of that is called know your customer. That's nothing new. That is not a new concept. Now, it was to telecom. On the telecom space, it was new because of where we were placing that responsibility. The responsibility has now been placed on the originating service provider. That's the carrier that's putting the calls onto the network. Guess who couldn't be more removed from the actual entity that's delivering the call? The originating service provider. It's like, here we go again. We're putting a burden on a carrier, and they are just receiving this traffic from someone who's receiving the traffic from someone who's actually got a contract with an entity, an organization, and delivering the calls. It's still broken. We have not solved this. We have not fixed this. But it is possibly doable by accepting and introducing and integrating the concept of organizational identity. So what would it look like possibly in Stir Shaken? So I'm going to assume people are kind of familiar with Stir Shaken. At least in the UK, Ofcom recently published, they're doing authenticity of the identity for CLI. There's that word identity again. And now we've got authenticity, accuracy. So what we're all looking at, whether it's the UK, whether it's France, whether it's Canada, whether it's the United States, we're trying to get down to the identity, the actual entity that the consumer is going to interact with and engage with on the other end of the line. So with Stir Shaken, this is the reality, and I've published this with the FCC, been very vocal about it. We put a lot of hope into Stir Shaken that it was going to solve spoofing. It does nothing. Nothing for spoofing. We were hoping that it would introduce identity. It can't spell the word identity. It's got nothing with identity other than who's the originating carrier? All right, that's all we're doing. Who's the originating carrier? Who put this call on the network? Tell that downline to the terminating provider. And then we're asking the device manufacturers, Apple, Samsung, you should present some verification and trust to the consumer. Why? Why should they? What happens when we get the verification wrong? Introduce Twitter, the world's best example of how not to do know your customer, how not to do verification. So I'm based in Washington, D.C. I live just 10 miles away from the White House. I feel like that's pretty safe space. I tell my parents, if anything happens there, I'm probably out too. Like, we got the FBI, CIA, I live all near that area. So what happened last week? A verified blue Twitter account posted a message that the Pentagon was on fire. Russia picks it up, they broadcast it. India picks it up, they broadcast it. And I'm like, it's been a pretty quiet day. I mean, I feel like if something like that happened, that the area around me, especially my friends who I know that all work at the government, they'd be all gone. Something would be going on. And sure enough, it was fake. Someone trusted it because of why? Literally a blue check mark. That's why they trusted it. No, so we've got to get this right. That's my call to action for this group. I think that's the call to action that Stefan is providing. That's the call to action that the panelists are. We are responsible for getting this right. It is not about who's got the best startup to be the one source for identity. I don't want to be the source for identity. But I am right now in the way that we are solving this problem for businesses. I'm empowering the organization to establish their identity, and in exchange for establishing their identity, they get a gain. The gain is they can get their information delivered down to the consumer. Right now, that all happens outside of this flow, which means that's not the right way to do it. That's not scalable. That's not really solving a problem as an ecosystem. That's just numerical setting up a company, doing a good service. Yes, we make a lot of money off of it. It's really great and good, but it's not really solving the real problem. It's siloed. We had a great conversation yesterday in a sidebar. Keep pointing to Stefan because it got a little heated, and that's fine. I loved it. But he had a very good point, and I realized it was like an aha moment to me that, you know, that he is right. We're a siloed solution, and I can't sit here and say everybody needs to use our platform to solve this problem. That's wrong. That's not scalable. What we've got to do is adopt a protocol that can be leveraged by anyone to build solutions. This creates a whole new market. On that concept, and Tim, we're going to talk about this on the panel because I had another idea the other day when we were talking. Perhaps the reason personal identity is not taking off the way that it should is because organizational identity is not there. I do think, making a prediction here, I think once we get organizational identity adopted, moving forward, integrated into businesses, personal identity becomes much more powerful. When you can have a verified organization connecting with a verified individual, you want to talk about eliminating fraud, it goes both ways. We're eliminating fraud from the consumer believing they're talking to a legitimate business when maybe they're not. That's fraud. We have fraud from businesses who get calls in from the call center impersonating to be one of their customers. They lose money that path too. That's fraud. This is the absolute only way to be able to stop fraud because the fraudsters are using identity, whether they're pretending to be someone personally or pretending to be a business. They figured it out. We've got to be smarter. So this is just looking at organizational identity. I truly and strongly believe that it'll be adopted for voice, because come on guys, AI has taken over on the voice side, messaging, social media, and email. We have got to adopt it. We've got to integrate it. And we got to take little baby steps. So how do we take those baby steps? That's where we're going to get into the panel. So what I would like to do is have our panelists join me up on stage. I think that's going to be in here. Yes, look at that. All right, thank you.